of civilization.
The podcast so good it will make your dick explode.
Even if you don't have one.
Hello and welcome. Trying another attempt at podcasting here. This time alone and also not recording any sort of video aspect. I don't really think showing video of myself looking in the camera, blinking, touching myself is really that useful. As captivating as my eyes are, really just don't think it's that necessary. So I'm just going to try it with audio only. And I tend to prefer podcasts that are audio because the video can be distracting. I like to listen in the background. And I recommend the same thing for you as well. Listen to the soothing, dulcet tones of my voice as you go about your business. I may put some pictures on here occasionally if it's necessary, but I will alert you to any such occurrence. Anyway, let's get into the meat of today's broadcast, as it were. This episode is entitled, Satan is a Nerd. And we're going to be delving right into this philosophical proposition that Satan is a nerd. First, let me describe the origin of this phrase, at least the origin to me. So, I think it was last week at the gym where I was, working out. I gotta maintain this sexy bod somehow, right? Anyway, I was there, and when I work out, just as when I do anything in public, I love to people watch because you can see some very interesting slices of life in our great nation. And I saw this gentleman that day. Now, I'm just going to describe his whole visage so you can really get the full picture of it. So he was a white, middle-aged, maybe 50s. He had one of those physiques that I can only describe as lizard-like or reptilian, if that makes sense. Just kind of, hard to explain, sort of stringy limbs. I couldn't see his hair because he was wearing I guess you call a skull cap or something like that, bandana or something tied around his head. I'm assuming he was probably balding. But the hair on his face, which was formed into the shape of a soul patch or flavor saver, as they call it, chin lettuce, was graying, salt and pepper. And he was wearing some woodland camouflage pants that one might wear when going deer hunting, and some kind of work boots or hunting boots or something like that. Or not hunting boots, but hiking boots, whatever. And then to top it all off, he had on a sleeveless black t-shirt, the old gym favorite, sleeveless shirt. And printed on the shirt was the phrase, Satan is a nerd. And I found this hilarious, of course, especially in combination with all of his other clothing. It's pretty obvious this guy, let's just say he's not going to be winning any MacArthur Grant Awards anytime soon. And it's pretty safe to assume that he wasn't wearing this shirt to be ironic, right? Like he wore this and thought, yeah, man, Satan's a nerd. That's what I believe. Now you can call this stereotyping, but fact is sometimes stereotyping just works. And I'd say it's pretty safe to say that it's an accurate judgment in this case. And aside from the humor value of this statement and this shirt, I think there's also something a little less funny behind it, which is that it sort of represents this attitude of anti-intellectualism that pervades among certain populations in this country, and of course other countries, but I'm just going to be focusing on the United States. It's like a revelment in ignorance, or a fetish for being ignorant, specifically ignorant of, the science or research and things like that, and just sort of trusting in the good old wisdom of the Bible or whatever other source of imagined knowledge that you put your faith in. But in America, we usually see this attitude most strongly, I would say, in the Christian right, as it were. That's a big generalization, but, just to save time, I'm just going to call it the Christian right. Okay, the message on this shirt is a literal demonization of knowledge, right? Because to most people, a nerd is someone who is pretty smart or knowledgeable, someone who pursues knowledge over other supposedly cool things such as getting laid or watching football on Sundays, God intended, and all that stuff, right? Of course, nowadays, especially among the millennial generation, a nerd is not really a pejorative term anymore. I mean, people are clamoring to call themselves nerd and to be seen as a nerd all over the place. It's sort of reversed and become something of a positive epithet. However, in this guy's mind, Randy, I'm just going to call him Randy. He looked like his name is probably Randy. In Randy's mind, Satan is a nerd. So it's interesting. Now, is this seen, do you interpret this as more of a condemnation, can't say this word, condemnation of Satan? Like, that was the biggest insult you could throw at Satan. Like, hey, Satan, you're a nerd. Or is it more of a condemnation of nerds? That, like, being a nerd is equivalent to being Satan, the Dark One, the Prince of Lies. So, anyway, that's not really the point of this podcast. If there is, in fact, any point, it's not that. Instead is an interesting phenomenon or trend that I've observed, and I'm not the only one, but I just had some personal experience with this right around the same time that I encountered old Randy. And the phenomenon is that there's now seems to be a very strong attitude of anti-intellectualism coming from many people on the left and not the right, as we traditionally think. Again, usually in America, if you were to ask someone, just name a group of people, first group of people who come to your mind when you think of someone who doesn't like science or is mistrustful of science. And a lot of people would probably say Christians or religious people, specifically creationists, right? They don't like biology because it states that human beings evolved from apes. They don't like geology because it states that the earth is not 6,000 years old or whatever they say, and so on. And that's still true. I mean, there's still many people among the Christian right, and I guess probably some in the Christian left as well. It doesn't really matter right or left. It's more about the religion, who believe that or who feel that way. However, I've been seeing a lot of a very, very similar attitude and very similar behavior coming out of some people on the left, specifically social justice warriors and radical feminists. And I'm probably just going to use the term feminists during this talk for the sake of convenience, but it's not limited only to feminists, and it doesn't include all feminists, of course. But my experience that I just had was specifically with they were also, I guess they were social justice warriors in general, but the issue was specifically about gender, and it came from a very, specifically feminist perspective. So I'm just going to use that term as kind of a catch-all, but just so you understand my meaning. Specifically, again, radical feminists, and not even all of them. Now, so there's this attitude of anti-intellectualism among a lot of them. When I started searching around the internet in preparation for making this recording, because I was thinking about this and I wanted to see what other people had said, I encountered a speech, which I'll put in the description, by a guy named Jonathan Haidt, who is a, quote, social psychologist and professor of ethical leadership at NYU. Okay, so probably you can guess just by hearing his job description or his position that he's about as SJW as they come in his beliefs, and he fully admits that and embraces that, which is fine. I mean, everyone is entitled to their own beliefs. But what I really like about him, and I haven't read any of his work, I've only seen one video from him, but based on this one video alone, he seems to be someone who has his own deeply held beliefs, his own personal beliefs, and yet also adheres very strictly to a sense of objectivity and a reliance on empirical data, the scientific method, and so on. And he also sports a pair of very robust eyebrows, so good on him for that. Anyway, I don't really want to go into much detail about him personally, but just focus on the content of this one lecture. And he was talking about anti-intellectualism, and basically he was presenting some data. I don't know the accuracy of it. I didn't really investigate it too much, so I'm not claiming this is gospel or it's reliable or any of that stuff. But it was pretty interesting that he presented some research. I can't remember if it was his own personal research or someone else's, but anti-intellectualism, or more specifically, distrust of science, is not always localized to religious people or Christians or whatever, as we tend to think of it in the United States. In fact, it depends a lot on your culture. So, for example, and specifically how your culture tends to view science overall, or something like that. For example, he gave, I think it was Denmark or something like that, one of those countries, where, for whatever reason, in that country, those people tend to, a lot of them view science and the findings of science as running counter to progressive ideals or progressive opinions, traditionally progressive opinions. I don't remember the exact specifics of it, but like, for example, a lot of science maybe contradicts the environmental ideology that some people there, that liberals there have. So therefore, more left-leaning people in that country distrust science than right-leaning people, because the people on the right, for the most part, don't see science as being a sort of an enemy, or as being a contradictory force to their beliefs. So really, and I think we can boil all this down. This is totally unscientific, but I choose to boil it down and just say that people like to form opinions, oftentimes not based on any sort of hard data, just based on their feelings and their impressions, and they get really ornery when other people disagree with their opinions, and perhaps more ornery when science does it, because scientists tend to have a greater sense of authority about them. You know, it's one thing if Willie at the fucking Citgo station disagrees with your opinion, it's easy to just dismiss him as a dumb cunt. But when some guy with a bunch of letters next to his name produces some research and he says, hey, this is my job, I do this all the time, and the results of my job say that you're dead wrong, that probably stokes people's reactions a little more. Now, I don't mean to suggest that science is quote-unquote always right, whatever that means. I mean, science isn't even some monolithic entity or organization, right? There's plenty of mistakes made among scientists because they are human after all. And of course, they all have their own biases as well. However, it just seems to be the case that this kind of reaction happens quite a lot, particularly among people who cling so deeply to their beliefs, and they kind of self-identify with their beliefs, which is one of the reasons why I don't do that, or I try not to. I mean, I don't claim myself to be any sort of, as a member of any group, ideological group, or political group, or anything like that. But it seems that most people do. They have this sort of need to be part of a tribe, which is a totally natural desire, but they really extend it out to all these other facets of their life too. But the problem is, to me, is when someone places their conviction and their beliefs above everything else, particularly above empirical information or observed information. And this kind of attitude has always annoyed the shit out of me. I mean, when I was a freshman and my first couple of years, actually, when I was in college, I was all about, arguing with Christians and with religious people for this exact reason. I was not religious, but I didn't really care if other people were religious. I mean, it didn't really mean anything to me. But I just really fucking hated those people who would go out and say a bunch of bullshit to support their beliefs. I don't care what you believe as long as you kept it to yourself. And again, I see a lot of very similar behavior among feminists and social justice warriors. So I don't, I have my own beliefs as well about those issues, my own personal beliefs, but before I can even get to discussing them, for me, the bigger problem is the way that people go about trying to champion their beliefs, specifically when they do it in a very anti-intellectual way. It really bothers me. And the really scary thing is when anti-intellectualism becomes institutionalized. That's pretty much never gone well. I mean, you look at, theocracies around the world all exhibit that. Pretty much every totalitarian dictatorship. I mean, look at the Soviet Union, Communist China, all those places, North Korea. I mean, in those places, nerds were Satan, more or less, to these people. Probably this was exhibited no more tragically than in Cambodia. I don't know why I said Cambodia that way, but it sounded kind of cool. Anyway, I think nowhere was more tragic than there. If you don't know, the Khmer Rouge, which was a nominally Marxist government, instituted a countrywide genocide program, essentially, imprisonment, torture, and genocide. And one of the major groups that was targeted were the so-called anti-intellectuals, which even that definition even grew to include people who wore glasses. They were seen as intellectuals, as enemies of the common people, sort of anathema to their vision of this like farming agrarian utopia, which of course was just complete nonsense. And the really funny thing is all the leaders, yeah, they were intellectuals themselves. They really were. I mean, I think Pol Pot was like a French literature teacher. If that isn't an intellectual, I don't know what is. So, as usual, hypocrisy ran rampant. Anyway, I digress. So, I want to talk about this experience that I had recently. And I think it perfectly exemplified this attitude that some people have. So, it happened on Facebook, which, as we all know, is just a beacon of social progress and enlightened discussion. And there was an exchange that occurred between myself and a person on my friends list. Well, I can say a woman. I have to say, pretty much, in order to tell the story correctly. A woman, but I won't give any details about this person. My intent is not at all to embarrass this person or call them out or anything like that. It's not really a personal thing. I'm just sort of using it as an example of this attitude, which frankly, I find rather abhorrent. I guess that could be construed as personal, but I don't know. In my mind, it's not. It's just something that people are slipping into more and more. Anyway, so this woman put a link to an article which was written by someone at salon.com. So you know it's just going to be so objective and well thought out, right? And the article was actually sort of reporting on a study conducted by the Harvard Business School about men and women working and a couple of different issues. I'll put links and all that stuff in the description so you can follow along at home if you want. Anyway, I won't go into too much detail about the specifics of the study unless I have to as I tell the story. But one of the key points of it had to do with studying via survey why, in many cases, women have slower career advancement than men, or something about careers. I don't remember the exact markers, but, that old discussion that feminists love to bring up. Rightly so. We should discuss it, but we should discuss it, factually. Now, the study sort of claimed to get to the root of some of these reasons, but I would argue that it actually didn't. Maybe I'll discuss that in a minute. So they were looking at men and women graduating from the Harvard Business School, asking them some questions about their plans and all this stuff, and then going back and looking at their career advancement and whatnot. Anyway, again, I don't want to go into too much detail about this study itself, but I will say that the title of the Salon article was something like, study finds that children don't ruin women's careers, husbands do. So this title is obviously trying to be very provocative, but it was not in any way supported by the actual content of the study. but who cares about that, right? Just say stuff, and then you're good. This also, by the way, makes me think of another really annoying phenomenon in our modern culture, which has to do with all the social media websites. And the fact that so many people will just simply take something, a link, post it on their Facebook or whatever, and then not insert any comment of their own into it. Now, in some cases, that's fine, especially if it's like something funny or whatever, but they just put it out there, this like a political thing, as if this represents me. I'm just going to put this out there, the title of this article, just because the title sounds cool. Yeah, husbands ruin careers. Haha. Stupid husbands. And they don't actually seem to do any sort of actual thinking about what they're posting or introspection. It's just like, here, blah, throw it out there. And this is what I think too. And then a lot of times if you put some sort of disagreement to it, they say, oh, well, I don't agree with all of this. I just thought it was interesting or something like that. And it's, I don't know, it just bugs me. Anyway, so this woman linked that article. I read it, was annoyed because the article misrepresented a lot of the findings in the study, and I thought the study itself was rather flawed and rather inconclusive. I raised some of these concerns in the comment section, to which the woman replied something like, I wish I had the exact text. I would definitely read it if I could, but I don't have that for reasons that I will reveal later. Anyway, the woman said something like, well, you're young and single and you've never been married, so you lack experience in this area, marriage, that is. So basically, you can't really comment on this. You don't have any sort of authority, which of course is a ridiculous statement because, if you had to have firsthand experience to understand scientific research, then research would be rather useless or extremely limited in scope. That means that biology research could only be understood by not even by biologists. Like, you could only understand evolutionary research, if you yourself remember evolving, right? Because she said I have to have basically first-hand experience, not even from a research perspective. I have to have lived through the subject of this research in order to somehow grasp it. So I responded much more politely than I just did and said something like, well, okay, that's true, but what specific experiences can you name that if I had gone through them, would actually change my understanding of these raw numbers? Why would a different experience change the way that I perceive these facts? Okay, I'm not asking how would experience change my opinion. See, I'm making a difference between opinion and fact. It's two different things. Sometimes they cross paths, but they shouldn't be conflated, in my opinion. And then she basically didn't answer that. She said something like, I'll tell you later. So I just sort of left it there. I wasn't really going to pursue it. I have no interest in, believe it or not, some people won't believe this, but I don't have an interest in arguing simply for argument's sake. When I argue or disagree with something, it is because I would like it to go somewhere eventually. So I kind of left it there. And then sometime later, another woman who is not my friend, not my Facebook friend and not my real friend because I don't know her, but she was on the first woman's friends list. She jumped into the conversation, pretty much echoed the other woman's statement that, you don't have experience and blah, blah, blah. And then she actually did try to address one of my original objections to the study, which, to summarize, basically, the study had said, people often say that women have slower career advancement than men because they opt out of work to take care of children. But our study finds that this isn't true. So here's where we get the title, Children Don't Ruin Careers, Husbands Do. But I disagreed with that summary because the researchers admitted, well, when we say opting out, we mean that the woman is opting out full-time. Like, she's not working at all, she's only taking care of kids. We're not including women who work less because of children in this definition of opting out, which I disagree with because working less is working less. You can expect that it would have some impact on your career results, in my mind. The difference between, there's a scale from not working at all to working, 24 hours a day or whatever. Everybody falls onto some point of that spectrum. It's not black and white or, binary, 1 and 2. So but that was one of my original points is that, well, I don't think that this study contradicts the idea that women are opting out, at least in some cases. Not that it explains every case of being passed over or slower advancement, but they say in there that a lot of women are reducing their work time in favor of raising children or taking care of children. That to me is opting out. It's partial opting out. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a choice. So this woman had come back and basically said, well, women don't have a choice. Not really. Because when it comes time to decide in a partnership or a marriage who's going to take off time from their career, it has to be women, basically, because women always make less than men, right? And she didn't say this, but I assume she was implying all other things being equal in the same exact job, the same exact education, experience, blah, 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 that the woman will be making less than men. Now, of course, so this opens up a whole other can of worms, right? And of course, this idea has been to say the least, it has not been proven. In fact, I wouldn't say it's, completely disproven 100%, but it's a lot of the research that I've seen suggests that this is not the case, that in most cases, the so-called wage gap is either non-existent or very close to non-existent, and furthermore, cannot be understood without accounting for a very large number of factors besides simply what you've got between your legs. And so I wrote back to her something to the effect of, well, in order for your point to actually hold up that women don't have a choice, before we can even discuss the merit of that argument, you have to first establish the case that women do in fact make less than men, all other things being equal, and that has not been shown. And then just to further support my point, I linked to a study which I'll post in the description, and it was just to sort of appease their sort of assuage any doubts they might have. It was even written by avowed feminists, and they did the study in order to try to prove that women are discriminated against when it comes to pay, that they make less than men, right? And anyway, I won't go into too many details about that study, but I pointed to certain parts of it that showed, hey, actually, if you look at this, most of the time, all other things being equal, or most other things being equal, there actually is no wage gap. They make the same in most fields, And so here's what really got good. So I said that, right? I said you have to, I think I actually used the exact phrase, you have to show that this wage gap is there before your other point kind of makes sense, right? But I was trying to I was being civil. I didn't say like, hey, shut up, bitch, or anything like that. I'm just having a discussion here. Nothing wrong with that. So now this woman comes back and says to me something like, and this is going to sound, like hyperbole or something, but she really did say that she said, you demand that I use facts. And yeah, I did say you have to, but that's kind of just an expression. And I think most people understand that. I'm not saying you have to slave or something like that. I'm saying that in order to do this, you must do this for that to be effective. Not I'm commanding you or anything like that. But she said, by demanding that I show you these facts, you are exercising your male privilege. So, yeah. So by using facts in a discussion about the economy, I'm in fact abusing my male privilege. Okay, so think about that for a second. She said a bunch of other stuff too. I can't really remember. I really wish I could access this conversation, but I cannot. And yeah, so that was male privilege, and she basically said, I don't care about these studies, I've lived through this or whatever. So again, this is just a typical anti-intellectual attitude. She's literally saying that facts are male privilege, therefore to be shunned, and she doesn't care about them, right? Even if they're found by feminists who are trying their damnedest to agree with her, she doesn't really care, right? She just wants to go by feeling, and that's how we should just decide everything. Not only by feeling, but by her feeling specifically. Her feeling, her experience is the right one. Everyone else's is wrong. Satan is a nerd. So, and then after this, I balked at this, as you can probably guess. And the original woman, who is my friend on my friends list, jumped back in and sort of piled on, agreeing with her friend there and saying, yeah, you don't have the experiences, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And I was basically, I just disagree with that. And I said, well, actually, my argument is actually, I think, a feminist argument. It should be, because I'm saying that women have a choice, but perhaps they are under the illusion that they don't have a choice because of societal norms, which I agree with. Like, societal norms in many countries, at least in America, still are kind of, state that women are supposed to be the ones to stay at home and all that. I don't necessarily agree with that. That's I don't necessarily agree that that's right. But yeah, I agree that those are the societal norms, and that a lot of girls or females might grow up and think, well, that's what I'm supposed to do, when that's not what I would teach my daughter if I had one. Okay, I mean, I would teach her to make her own choices in all cases. So I think my argument was actually a feminist one. I'm saying, hey, women have a choice. Rather than demonizing husbands or men, why don't we instead empower the women to make their own choices and to recognize their own agency in society? So, and then this woman, the second woman, comes back and says something like, well, the women don't have a choice because of capitalistic patriarchy. Yeah. And she didn't really bother to explain what that means, or how, she didn't bother to explain the causal link between quote unquote capitalistic patriarchy and women not having a choice. She just kind of threw it out there, and as if that was like a self-explaining, self-evident truth, which of course it's not. And then this part I really loved. I mean, I wish I had a screenshot of this. When I asked her to explain that, or excuse me, I demanded with my male privilege penis, my male phallic privilege, I demanded that she explain herself. She literally said, and I quote, "because patriarchy," and patriarchy was in all caps. So yeah, I mean, pretty much because reasons, women don't have any choices when it comes to their career. And that was pretty much where the exchange got cut off. Because when I went back to look at it, it had all been deleted by the first woman, apparently. So yeah, after all that, I mean, I'm here talking about it. We had a disagreement, but there was no profanity used. It was a civil discussion, perhaps not a very rational one, but it was civil. So there's no excuse there to delete it. It was just like, as far as I can tell, I don't agree with this. I don't like disagreement on my space or my page, whatever. So I'm just going to go ahead and wipe this from existence. And I think that was the part that really annoyed me the most, was the deletion of it. Because if that isn't anti-intellectual, I don't know what is. I mean, basically saying that disagreement is unwanted, when I in fact think that disagreement is an extremely important part of development of ideas, development of society. I mean, if you go back and look at Socrates, he was pretty much killed for this. People have used the term, I think Plato used the term that Socrates was the gadfly of society, or the gadfly of the state, or something like that. In other words, like, yeah, he was annoying, but his constant challenging of people's ideas was actually an invaluable service. So I'm not comparing myself to Socrates, of course. I mean, don't get me wrong. For one thing, I'm way smarter than he probably was. I mean, can he use a phone, a smartphone, or a computer? No, of course not. But anyway, I'm not comparing myself to him, but I am saying that, anyone who offers disagreements in a rational and civil fashion should not be shunned, even if the person is disagreeing with you. Okay, that's all I'm saying. And I will say this too: I'm not accusing the person who deleted it of, being 100% anti-intellectual. I don't believe that. I mean, in this case, I think the behavior was anti-intellectual, but I'm not saying that this person is necessarily that all the time. I don't think that she is. Also, I should say that I don't want to give any details, but let's just say I know that she had even deeper personal reasons on this particular topic for getting, emotional or getting very heated about it. So I do make an allowance for that. I'm just, kind of using it as an example. Again, it's not a personal thing at all. I just think it's a very typical example of this, growing attitude of anti-intellectualism that I see among the social justice warriors and the, so-called progressives and all that stuff. And again, I'm not excusing people on the right. They, but a lot of them have always been that way. This is just like piling on even more, right? None of it's good. I mean, no anti-intellectualism anywhere, I think, is good. All right, but that also means that none of it should be excused, regardless of the side or the wing of the political spectrum that it comes from. And in addition to this kind of overt anti-intellectualism, I've also noticed another covert kind. And I don't know if this is technically falls under that umbrella, but I would call it anti-intellectualism, and it's a more insidious version. And this is when people will actually enter fields of study, academic fields, or even do it kind of as like a layman, and then do a lot of really bad research, quote unquote research, to try to prove what they already believe, and then kind of go in under the auspices of scientific authority and say, aha, we've shown that we are right, which is kind of what I think those feminists were doing in that study that I mentioned about the wage gap. And it really sickens me when because at least I haven't seen any of them that I know of actually falsify their data. But what they'll do is they'll get this data and then they'll just come up with these really grossly illogical and unfounded conclusions that have oftentimes no causation, or the model of the experiment is completely flawed because it's unfalsifiable. I mean, God Sod has talked about this a lot. He has great videos about it. A lot of times we see people setting up these, experiments, but they're completely unfalsifiable. It's like either whatever result they get in their mind will prove their original point. Now, what use is that to advancing knowledge? I mean, none. I mean, it's simply a form of intellectual masturbation. Another example of this I just saw recently was about awards in science fiction and fantasy writing. I don't really want to get into that because this is already going on long enough, but I think I might make another video about that study because I think there's a lot to say about it. But we see it among, a lot of these professors, people like Anita Sarkeesian, who kind of claims that she's doing research, and she's going out to find the truth. But really, it's not research that, anyone with basic training of doing research would recognize. I mean, I'm not an expert myself. I went to college. I have a bachelor's degree. That makes me nothing. I mean, it means nothing except that I was willing to attend the classes and do all of the, or at least some of the required work. But, and it doesn't matter. I mean, anybody can learn anything on their own, essentially. But, I did take courses and I did spend a lot of time learning about research methods in social science. I can hear the laughter now coming from the hard science people. Reminds me of another exchange, actually, I think I had the same day as this one, in which I was told that, I have to learn that society is out to oppress black women. Literally, that was the quote. Society is out to oppress black women. And that I would learn all this if I would just, quote, take a sociology class, end quote. I almost thought the person was trolling, but I'm pretty sure she wasn't, unfortunately. That should actually be the battle cry, the official battle cry of social justice warriors. Take a sociology class! So, is Satan a nerd? I mean, is literacy bad? Are facts the tools of an oppressive patriarchy? I mean, are these, people really want us to expect us to believe these kind of statements? I just don't get it. I mean, you'd think by now, at this point in humanity's development, we would be free from, or we would stop, as Bill Hicks said, being afraid of ideas. But it seems that as long as ideological zealots exist, which I'm sure they'll always exist at this rate, there's always going to be some people who are afraid of ideas because they feel that ideas threaten their paradigm. But again, I mean, I just don't think that's the case. Like, if you have a certain worldview, you can have that worldview while at the same time acknowledging maybe it's not totally a logical view, maybe it's based more on your emotion, but at least be honest about it. And, don't expect everyone else in the world to conform to that when you give them no reason to. Don't expect to bully them into conforming to it. And then we can all get along and sing songs together. I hope. Anyway, that's all for this podcast, so I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.